Hello everyone, my name is Evelyn Reed. I hope this finds you well. Are you living on your own these days? Or are you in a bustling home with your kids and maybe even your grandkids? If you're enjoying the peace and quiet of your own place, I say good for you, cherish that freedom with all your heart. But if you're considering moving in with your children, I'd ask you to take a long, hard pause before you make any decisions. And why is that? Well, after you hear what I have to say, I have a feeling you might just think twice. The day my son Michael got married, I knew my life would never be the same. A strange, heavy feeling settled in my heart. A mother's intuition, I suppose, warning me of the changes on the horizon. I'd heard all the stories. Of course, the classic mother-in-law and daughter-in-law struggles, the conflicts, the misunderstandings. But I truly believed that with enough love and understanding, with the wisdom I'd gained over the years, we could navigate any challenge that came our way. I made a promise to myself I would be a modern mother-in-law. I wouldn't meddle in their lives, but I would always be there, a quiet source of support whenever they needed me. I was so wrong. It was a mistake, a profound one, that would cost me dearly in my golden years. When my daughter-in-law, Sarah, first joined our family, she was the picture of sweetness and consideration. She had these bright, clear eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the room. She was always so polite, calling me Mrs. Reed and asking about my day in a way that truly warmed my heart. She'd ask me for the old family recipes, the ones my own mother had taught me, and she seemed genuinely interested in our holiday traditions, the little rituals we'd built over the years. I was overjoyed to share them with her. I thought to myself, finally, my Michael has found a wonderful wife, someone who will be a great mother someday. He's found a woman who respects her elders and understands the value of family. I imagined our home becoming even warmer, even happier, a place always filled with laughter. I had such high hopes for her, a boundless well of affection just waiting to be given. I promised myself I would love her as if she were my own daughter, that I'd never be unfair, and that I would protect her as the newest member of our family. But just 3 months later, everything changed so fast, it made my head spin. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I simply couldn't accept the new, painful reality. The sweet, gentle girl I once knew had transformed. It was as if she'd crowned herself the queen of our 3-story house, the very house my husband, David, and I had spent our entire lives building. This was our sanctuary, the peaceful harbor we created to shelter us from life's storms. Every single thing in it, from the worn-in dining table where we'd shared 1,000 meals to the set of crystal glasses my grandmother had passed down to me, was tied to a memory, to our hard work and sacrifice. And now, it felt like it had become the personal kingdom of a stranger, a person I had once trusted completely. Every morning, she would sleep until 10 o'clock, sometimes even later. My day, on the other hand, began at 5. My little alarm would buzz quietly, and I'd slip out of bed, careful not to wake my husband David or our little grandson, and head downstairs to start making breakfast before David and Michael had to leave for work. I always tiptoed around the house, trying my best not to disturb Sarah's sleep. She's still young, I'd tell myself. Maybe she needs the extra rest to recover from her busy days. I tried to comfort myself with excuses, to find any reason to justify her laziness. But as the days turned into weeks, my patience started to wear thin, like a riverbed slowly drying up in a drought. After every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she never once offered to help with the dishes. They'd just pile up in the sink, sometimes for so long that they'd start to smell and attract flies. I was raised to take pride in my home, to keep things neat and clean and tidy. Seeing that mess made my heart sink with disappointment. The dirty laundry would overflow from the hampers, and she'd just ignore it, sometimes even leaving clothes scattered all over the floor. I didn't want to complain. I didn't want to start a fight or disrupt the peace of our home. But the truth was, the weight of it all was settling on my shoulders like an invisible cloak. I'd find myself asking, does she ever stop to think about how much work this is for me? Does she feel even a flicker of guilt, seeing me do everything by myself? Or does she just see it as my duty? something a mother-in-law is simply supposed to do. My husband, David, was getting on in years. He was old and starting to grow frail, and his health simply wasn't what it used to be. The arthritis in his joints would torment him every night, a deep, persistent ache that stole his sleep. He couldn't do any of the heavy lifting around the house anymore, not like he used to. This was a man who had worked his fingers to the bone his entire life for our family. A man who had dedicated every waking hour to raising our son and giving him a better life than we'd had. Now, if anyone on this earth had earned a rest, it was David. He deserved a quiet retirement, to spend his golden years in peace, just the two of us enjoying the simple calm of the day. I would look at him, sitting in his favorite armchair, his hair as white as fresh snow and his back stooped from the weight of all those years of labor. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't let him worry about another single thing. I couldn't bear to add another ounce of weight to his already burdened shoulders. And so, it all fell to me. I had to carry the weight of the entire household, all by myself, from before the sun came up until long after it had gone down. I was the one who made all 3 meals a day for the entire family: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. My days started in the quiet dark of the early morning and didn't end until I was too exhausted to stand. I always tried so hard to make delicious food, something everyone would enjoy. I especially tried to make things that my daughter-in-law, Sarah, would like. I remember asking her once what kind of food she preferred, but she'd barely shown any interest at all. She just gave a vague, dismissive answer, as if eating was just another chore for her, a burden instead of a pleasure. Still, I was determined to win her over. I'd watch cooking shows and search for new, complicated recipes online, hoping to find something that would make her smile. She's still young, I'd tell myself. Maybe she's just not used to our family's way of life, or the kind of home cooking I grew up with. I'd spend hours in the kitchen, carefully washing and chopping fresh vegetables from the market, simmering sauces, tasting and adding a little more seasoning, just hoping that everyone would sit down to a warm, satisfying meal. But so often, all my efforts were met with a heavy silence, or worse, a quiet, cold word of criticism. And then there was the laundry, for everyone. Not just our everyday clothes, but Michael and Sarah's professional work clothes too. I'd run load after load, always making sure to wash them perfectly, dry them completely, and fold every single item with care. I would spend hours at the ironing board, pressing every shirt and pair of pants until they were crisp and perfect, so everyone would look their best when they left the house. In my mind, this wasn't a chore. It was a quiet way of showing my love and care for my family. But never once did I hear a word of thanks. Not once did I receive so much as a grateful glance. It was as if the clean, folded clothes just magically appeared in their drawers. Every single day, I cleaned that entire house, from the first floor all the way up to the third. It was a spacious 3-story home, the one David and I had put our life savings into, and it was filled with furniture and little nooks and crannies that collected dust. Keeping it clean took so much time, so much effort. I wanted our home to always feel spotless and airy, to smell fresh and welcoming. It was a reflection of our family, after all. It was the place we all lived. I would scrub every single step on the staircase, wipe down every windowsill, and get into every last corner of the house, making sure no hidden spot was missed. I wanted this house to be a sanctuary, a place where everyone could feel comfortable, cozy, and at peace when they came home, tired from a long day at work. But there were times, as I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the floor, that I felt less like a mother in her own home and more like the hired help, cleaning a hotel for guests who never checked out. I also looked after my grandson. He was still so little, just a toddler, and he needed constant, careful attention, from feeding him his meals and changing his diapers to rocking him to sleep and playing with him on the floor. I loved that little boy with every piece of my heart. He was my treasure, the light of my life, and in those increasingly dark and difficult days, he was my only hope. I would spend all day with him, reading him stories about princesses and princes and brave knights, building towers with his blocks, and lulling him to sleep in the warmth of my arms. He was my greatest comfort, the one true reason I found the strength to keep going. And, of course, there were the dishes. After every single meal, a mountain of plates, bowls, and silverware would be piled high in the sink, and I was the one who had to wash it all, scrubbing until not a single speck of food remained. Sometimes my hands would go numb and ache from being in the hot, soapy water for so long, but I always pushed myself to finish the job. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I didn't do it, nobody else would. But that wasn't the worst of it. What hurt more than the aching back or the raw hands was having to stand there and listen to my own son, Michael, scold me because a meal I had cooked wasn't to his wife's taste. Every time I heard those words, my heart would clench in my chest, a physical pain, as if someone were squeezing it with all their might. I had tried my very best. I had poured my heart and soul into every single dish. I was cooking with a mother's love. The same love I had put into every meal I'd ever made for him his entire life. And now, to hear that, I felt so completely insulted, so disrespected. Those words didn't just wound me, they shattered the trust I had in the son I was once so incredibly proud of, the son I had always believed would be my rock, my support in my old age. In my own home, I felt I had become a maid, one with no wages, no name, and certainly no voice. I was nothing more than a faint shadow, drifting silently through the rooms, getting everything done without a single complaint, without a word of criticism, without so much as a heavy sigh. I truly didn't understand what I had done wrong or why my life had turned out this way. All I had ever done was try to build a good life for my family, to fulfill my duties as a mother, as a wife, and now, as a mother-in-law. Every single night, long after everyone else was fast asleep and the house was wrapped in a thick blanket of darkness and silence, I would find myself sitting alone at the kitchen table. I would gaze out the window at the soft glow of the streetlights dotting our quiet neighborhood, and I would ask myself the same questions over and over. Where is my life headed? Is this all I have to look forward to? This endless cycle of work and heartache? Is there a single soul on this earth who understands what's in my heart? My son, Michael, the child I had gone through so much pain to bring into this world, the little boy I had raised from the moment he took his first breath, the person to whom I had dedicated every ounce of my youth and energy. I remembered the boy he used to be. He was such a good son, so respectful and kind. A boy who always loved his parents and listened carefully to my advice. He was my pride and joy, the repository of all my hopes for the future. I can still so clearly see him as a little boy, wrapping his small arms around my neck, squeezing me tight and saying, "I love you, Mommy. When I grow up, I'm going to take real good care of you." Those words still echo in the quiet corners of my mind, a sweet, painful ghost of a time that's long since passed. Now, everything had changed. That promise, that little boy, was nothing more than a distant memory. The man standing in my house was no longer my son. He had become a stranger, someone I didn't recognize at all. Now, all it took was for his wife, Sarah, to furrow her brow just a little, a slight, almost imperceptible gesture, and he would instantly turn on me. His voice would become harsh, cold, and stripped of any respect he once had for me. "Mom, just leave my wife alone. You're my mother, not hers." Those words were like a knife plunging into my chest. Not just one knife, but thousands of them, twisting and turning with every syllable. The pain was unbearable, a deep, hollow ache that no words could ever properly describe. And the worst part was, I had tried so hard not to interfere. I had bent over backward to accept everything, to adapt to their way of life, to be the kind of mother-in-law who stayed in the background, but he didn't see that. He couldn't or wouldn't understand that everything I did out of love for our family, for him and his own little boy. All I ever wanted was for our home to be a peaceful, happy place. But in his eyes, I was the one starting arguments, I was the one making his wife miserable. I was the one deliberately trying to drive a wedge between them. I felt a crushing sense of helplessness wash over me. I had no idea how to make him see the truth, how to make him understand that I only wanted what was best for him. He'd walk in the door after a long day at work, and before he even had a chance to set his briefcase down or loosen his tie, he would look at me with suspicion in his eyes, as if I were a criminal standing in a police lineup. "Was Sarah crying today because of something you said?" he'd ask, his tone already thick with accusation. My mouth would fall open, but no words would come out. I hadn't said a thing to her. I hadn't done a thing. Some days, I hadn't even seen her face yet, and still, I was already being found guilty of a crime I didn't commit. I felt like an actor pushed onto a stage, forced to play a part in a drama where I didn't even know the script. And in this play, I was always the villain. I was always the one to blame. I wanted so desperately to explain, to tell him that I had done nothing, that I was completely innocent. But the words would catch in my throat, tangled in a knot of sorrow and frustration. I knew, with a painful certainty, that it wouldn't matter what I said. No matter how I tried to defend myself, he wouldn't believe me. I could see it clearly now. He was completely and utterly under his wife's spell. My daughter-in-law was a master of manipulation. Behind my back, she would tell Michael the most awful things about me, weaving intricate tapestries of lies, twisting the truth just enough to make me look cruel and unreasonable. But in front of everyone else, she played the part of the perfect, gentle victim. She could summon tears at a moment's notice. Her voice would tremble with false vulnerability as she spun her pitiful stories to my son, and Michael, blinded by his affection for her, believed every single word. He never questioned her version of events, never listened to my side of the story, and never once tried to find out what was really happening in his own home. I can't count the number of times I saw her do it. Start crying over nothing, acting frail and weak, all to capture his sympathy and ensure he would take her side. For a while, I had believed it myself. I thought she was just a fragile young woman who needed to be protected. But now, my eyes were wide open. I finally saw her for who she was, a cunning, clever woman who was using my son's love as a weapon, a tool to achieve her own goals and paint me as a monster in his eyes. One evening, my husband, David, was sitting in his armchair in the living room, quietly reading the newspaper. As I looked at him, something inside me finally snapped. All the pain, the humiliation, and the powerlessness that I had been bottling up for months suddenly came, rushing to the surface, like a dam that had finally broken. I just stood there and stared at my husband, the man I had shared my life with for so many years. My eyes, I knew, must have been filled with all the unspoken words, all the silent despair that had been gathering in my soul. "We're not the owners of this house anymore, David," I said. My voice was choked and thick with emotion, and the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free, streaming down my cheeks. I couldn't stop them. "We are nothing more than servants, living on the mercy of our own children. I can't take it anymore, David. In my own home, in my own life, I feel like I'm slowly dying." My husband gently placed his newspaper on the end table beside his armchair and looked at me, his eyes filled with a familiar, weary pain that mirrored my own. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. I knew he understood. I knew he was feeling the same crushing weight, suffering the same quiet indignities right alongside me. He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and steady. I felt a small flicker of warmth spread through my heart, a tiny island of comfort from the one person who had been with me through every storm life had ever thrown our way. The two of us had poured our entire lives into building this home, piece by piece, memory by memory. And now, we were just parasites living within its walls, with no say, no authority, and certainly no respect. We had sacrificed everything for our son, given him every bit of our youth to raise him into the man he had become, only to be treated like an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated. Later that evening, as I was in the kitchen boiling some water to make oatmeal, For my grandson, a sudden violent wave of dizziness washed over me. The room began to tilt and spin, my vision blurring at the edges as the world swam before my eyes. Everything was a swirling vortex of color and light. I couldn't keep my balance any longer. My legs gave out from under me, and I collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor. I heard the sharp metallic clang of the pot as it hit the ground, and then everything around me was swallowed by an impenetrable darkness, like a moonless night with no end in sight. I felt myself sinking, falling into a bottomless abyss of despair and utter loneliness. When I came to, I was on my husband's back. He was carrying me, rushing through a torrential downpour, his steps heavy and urgent as he hurried toward a waiting taxi. Cold raindrops splattered against my face, but I didn't feel the chill. All I could feel was a tight, agonizing pain constricting my heart, a pain so profound it defied words, far worse than any physical ailment. I could see David's face, etched with worry and exhaustion, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and helplessness. I knew he was scared. He was afraid of losing me, terrified that I was about to leave him for good. I tried to tell him I was okay, that everything was going to be all right, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat was dry and tight, and I could do nothing but hang on. On the way to the hospital, David tried to call our son. He dialed Michael's number again and again, dozens of times, but Michael never picked up. My husband kept calling until the phone must have been hot in his hand, but all he got in return was the hollow, hopeless sound of the phone ringing on and on into an empty room. Finally, he gave up and called our daughter-in-law, Sarah. "This time?" she answered. But after only a few seconds, she hung up without offering a single word of explanation. I could hear the tinny sound of her voice coming through the phone's earpiece. It was curt, impatient, and laced with irritation, as if our emergency was nothing but a nuisance, an unwelcome interruption to her evening. David tried calling one more time, and on that call, he heard a voice from inside the house. A voice so cold, so cruel, so utterly devoid of human compassion that the words it spoke shot straight into my heart and shattered it into a million pieces. I wish she'd just hurry up and die already. When my husband told me what he had heard as I lay in the hospital bed, I bit down hard on my lower lip, fighting with every ounce of my being to hold back the tears. I didn't want him to see me break down, to see how weak I had become. My heart felt as though it were being pierced by 1,000 tiny needles, an excruciating, unbearable pain. I couldn't believe that such monstrous words could come from the mouth of the woman I had once loved and trusted, the woman I had thought of as my own daughter. I had truly believed she would be the one to build a family with my son, the one who would help care for us in our old age. But now, I saw how wrong I had been, how fatally I had misjudged her character. She possessed not a shred of humanity, not an ounce of kindness. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and trampled upon. A few minutes later, as I was taking deep breaths, trying to calm the storm raging inside me and soothe the ache in my chest, my own phone began to ring, its shrill tone echoing like thunder in the sterile silence of the hospital room. I glanced at the screen. 20 missed calls from Michael. I stared at his name, my heart a hollow, empty cavern filled with a terrifying numbness. What could he possibly want? Was he calling to see if I was okay? To apologize? Perhaps to try and make things right? A tiny, fragile glimmer of hope flickered to life within me. Maybe he had finally realized his mistake. Maybe, deep down, he still loved his mother. I answered the phone, and the words I heard next made me freeze, my entire being shattering into countless irreparable fragments like a broken mirror. "Sarah's not making dinner. You need to get home and cook." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't ask if I needed any help. The only thing he cared about, the only thing that occupied his mind, was his wife's dinner, his wife's stomach. In that moment, I felt completely discarded, used up, and treated like some kind of unfeeling tool. I was no longer his mother. I was just the cook, nothing more. That tiny, fragile spark of hope I'd been holding on to deep inside me was completely extinguished, just like a candle snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind. I finally realized, with a clarity that was as sharp as broken glass, that I meant nothing to him anymore. I was simply an instrument, a servant whose only value lay in her utility. Once I was no longer useful, I would be cast aside without a second thought. For 40 years, I had been secretly saving money. It came from the little bits of cash I earned on the side baking bread for church bake sales, cleaning houses for neighbors, babysitting the children on our block. Every single dollar was a piece of my sweat and tears, a symbol of the sacrifices I had made for my family, a drop of my own blood. When I combined that with my pension and the savings my husband had carefully put away, the total came to nearly $700,000. It was not a small sum. It was the result of a lifetime of hard work, a nest egg built over an entire lifetime. I had always planned to divide that money equally between my children and grandchildren someday, to give them a leg up so they could have a better life, a life where they wouldn't have to struggle the way I did, a future that was brighter than my past. I had dedicated my entire existence to serving and sacrificing for my family. This money was meant to be my final gift to them, my last blessing. But on that day, as I lay there in that sterile hospital bed, looking at my husband's old, weary face, streaked with tears as he worried over me, I made a decision. It was a decision that would change my life, and the lives of my entire family, forever. I would not let my hard-earned money, my life savings, fall into the hands of people who didn't appreciate it, people who had treated me so cruelly, people who had trampled all over my love. I wanted that money to be used in a more meaningful way, to help people who were in the same situation as me, people who were old and lonely, people who were being mistreated by their own children. I called my lawyer. My voice was still weak from the ordeal, but there was no hesitation, no trace of regret. It was firm and clear. I want you to remove my son's name from all of my estate documents. The new beneficiary will be the National Fund for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. I knew this decision would shock him. I knew it would make him furious, that it would break his heart in a way. But I just didn't care anymore. I was just so tired, so utterly exhausted down to my very soul. I couldn't bear to live another single day in this pain, in this humiliation. I wanted to live a life that had meaning, a life I could be proud of, a life where I was free to make my own choices. I wanted my money to help people who were old and vulnerable, people who were suffering at the hands of their own children, so they could have a better life, so they wouldn't have to go through what I had endured. After that, I sent a text message to my son. It was just one sentence, short and to the point, but it contained all of my pain, all of my disappointment, and all of my newfound liberation. You only thought of me when you needed a hot meal on the table. It never once crossed your mind that I needed to be treated like a human being, did it? I turned off my phone, and a strange sense of lightness washed over me. It was as if a great weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. A boulder that had been pressing down on my chest for so long had been rolled away. I had said everything I needed to say, and I had done everything I needed to do. There were no regrets left. I felt as if I had been reborn, as if I were about to start a whole new life, all over again. A week later, when I was discharged from the hospital and came home, there was a big sign planted in our front yard. In bold red letters, it read, "For sale." People were buzzing about it, whispering to one another. The neighbors came over to ask, their eyes a mixture of curiosity, concern, and pity. "Evelyn, David, why on earth are you selling the house?" I just smiled. It was a calm, peaceful smile, one free of any bitterness or pain. My husband, David, patted my shoulder gently, his eyes full of love and understanding. He had always been by my side, supporting every decision I made, my unwavering rock through it all. "I just want you to live the rest of your days with smiles, Evelyn, not tears," he said, his voice so warm and full of love. It felt like a promise. We sold the house and left the bustling city behind, the place that was once our home, but had become our own private hell. We moved out to the peaceful, quiet countryside. to a little town nestled among green fields that stretched all the way to the horizon, with a river that flowed as gently as time itself, and small, lovely houses tucked away beneath the shade of ancient trees. We weren't looking to get rich. We just wanted to live a life of peace and freedom, to do the things we loved. This new life was a gift we gave ourselves, the reward we had more than earned after so many years of hardship. And there, we opened a small noodle shop. Our menu had only 3 items, and we made just 50 bowls a day, no more. We didn't need a lot of customers. We didn't need a lot of money. We just needed enough to live comfortably, without having to worry about where our next meal would come from. I prepared the freshest ingredients myself every single morning, simmered the fragrant broth with my own 2 hands, and kneaded and cut the chewy noodles from scratch. We named the shop Smile Noodles. I made a promise to myself that I would only ever cook from the heart, only when I felt happy. I wanted every single strand of noodle, every last drop of broth, to be filled with my spirit, with the joy and tranquility I had finally found here. I truly believe that when a cook is happy, the food they make tastes better. The customers can feel that joy. They can taste the love that I pour into every bowl. And everyone told me how delicious it was. My smile would spread to my customers, and their smiles, in turn, would make me even happier, reminding me that this life was truly worth living. As I listened to their stories, sharing in their joys and their sorrows, I never felt lonely anymore. My husband David was always there, helping me wash the dishes, wipe down the tables, and peel the vegetables. He no longer had to worry about strenuous work, and he looked so content, so at peace. We worked together, we talked together, we enjoyed this simple life together, building a new home, a new life, from the ground up. One afternoon, a crew from the local television station came by. They were doing a story for a segment they called Inspiring Seniors, and they wanted to interview us. And so, I was on television. I was shining, they said, as if I had never lived through that hell. I was like a single flower that had bloomed after a long and violent storm. My eyes were bright, my smile was radiant, and I told my story, the whole truth, without hiding a single detail, without a moment's hesitation. I wanted to share my story so that other people might learn from it, so they wouldn't have to go through what I had been through. I wanted them to know that no matter how difficult life gets, we can always find our way back to happiness. My son, Michael, saw that program back in the city. He just sat there, I was told, in complete silence, unable to say a single word. He probably couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that the mother he had treated so cruelly, the woman he had looked down on with such contempt, was now living a life so full of happiness and peace, a kind of peace he would never be able to find for himself. I knew he was regretting it. I knew he was suffering, tormented by what he had done. But it was too late now. A few days later, he drove all the way out to our little noodle shop. He stood there at the entrance for a long moment and then, right there in front of a shop full of customers eating their lunch, without any hesitation, without any shame, he fell to his knees. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice trembled, and his eyes were filled with tears that soon began to stream down his cheeks. I just stared at him. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell him to get out. But I didn't forgive him either. I knew he was in pain. But my pain had been so much greater, and the hurt he had inflicted on me was immeasurable. I could not forgive him for what he had done, for the cruel words he had thrown at me, for the years of suffering I had been forced to endure. I looked him straight in the eye. My voice was low, but it was steady. It didn't waver, and it held no emotion at all. While I was living with you, you were killing me. Now, I've come back to life. I don't need you anymore. My words echoed in the quiet noodle shop, sounding like a final judgment. The customers around us had all fallen silent, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and understanding. They had seen it all. The shop was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. The only sound was the sound of my son's ragged sobs. He covered his face with his hands and ran out of the shop, his cries trailing behind him in the air. the sound of a repentance that had come far too late, a regret that could never be redeemed. I turned to face my customers and gave a deep, respectful nod. My eyes still held a shadow of sadness, but they also held a powerful resolve. Folks, I am so sorry for the disturbance. As a special for today, I will be serving the ramen of tears. And so I made that ramen, and I poured every single one of my emotions into it. I put in my own tears, my son's tears, and finally, the tears of my own liberation. Every single noodle, every last drop of the savory broth, was steeped in those feelings, and I truly believe that my customers could feel it too. That ramen of tears was so much more than just a meal. It was a story about life itself, a lesson about love, and, in the end, about forgiveness. It was the story of a mother who had weathered a terrible, violent storm and had finally found her peace on the other side. It was a story of strength, of patience, and of survival. And that brings my story for today to a close. I know that life is a long journey for each of us, filled with its own unique trials and tribulations. There will be times when you feel hopeless, when you truly believe you can't possibly take another step forward. But please, I ask you, don't ever give up hope. Believe in yourself, and trust in the strength you have deep down inside you. Find your happiness in the little things. Find it in a simple smile from a stranger, in a warm, comforting meal, or in a quiet, peaceful moment with someone you love. Never, ever let anyone take away your right to live a full and meaningful life. To all of you who have stayed with me and listened to my story until the very end, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere thanks. Your kindness and your understanding have been a tremendous source of encouragement for me. I truly hope that my story might serve as a cautionary tale for some, a wake-up call for others, and perhaps a source of inspiration. Please cherish what you have in your life and live every day with no regrets. In my next video, I'll continue to share more stories about life, about my experiences, and about the lessons I've learned along the way. Until we meet again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.